Thank you all for coming. I see people from around the world. I see people from Asia, India, Hong Kong. I see people from Switzerland and the US and Dubai, Toronto. We have people from lots of places. So welcome, everyone. So I'll just get started on a bit of an explanation of what we're doing here today, and then I'll get fully started in just a few minutes. Um, so the title of the workshop, I wanted to start with something that we can all identify with. So loving your whole self. But what does that mean, your whole self, right? We might have heard of loving maybe, my part of me, or loving myself, or maybe loving my inner self, or loving my higher self, or loving my inner children. But what does loving our whole self mean? And so I wanted to start with just a little bit of an idea of what am I talking about when I say the whole self? And then we'll get a little bit into reparenting our inner children. So the whole self idea here, there's actually a whole philosophy behind this that ties in psychology and philosophy together in understanding how do we make sense of who we are? How do we understand, our specific identity in the world? And developmental psychology in particular has helped us understand over the last few decades, but particularly the last years, there's been a lot of progress in developmental psychology that helps us understand that our sense of self actually grows and changes over time. And, we can see this quite readily for those of us who have kids. You have your infant who comes out and is just absorbing the world. And then, they grow up and they start running around, and we hit that terrible two stage where, we really got to set boundaries and hold them to those. And then we grow up a little bit more and we open up to friendships and go to school, and our sense of self shifts throughout these times. Who am I? That question, who am I? What is the answer that comes back when we ask that question? And what often happens as we're growing up is we have certain experiences that can fracture our sense of self. They can break it off into parts or bits. And that's really what I'm pointing at here when I talk about the whole self, is how do we look at not just the parts of us that show up in our daily lives or in most of our relationships, but how do we look at even those parts of us that are hidden, the parts that are, we might have suppressed, or the parts of us that we might have exiled and sent off somewhere else, never to see the light of day, or the parts of us that only come up very rarely in situations where we feel very safe. And so just noticing what that's like, to start to sense into what are all the different parts of me? Like if I really don't hide any of them or suppress any of them, I really open up to the possibility of all of them being present. What is really included in my whole self? And we might find that there isn't a clear answer to that. And that's part of what the workshop today is going to explore, is how do we start to integrate into our identity, into ourself, this wider, expansive, whole collective of selves that exists inside of us, to have a unified, authentic self that we can operate from day to day. Now, this is where the reparenting the inner children comes from, because what often happens when we fracture off as we have perhaps difficult life experiences is that as this fracturing happens, the parts that start to fracture because of some sort of experience that they, had a hard time dealing with, these parts often stay at the age that they were when we had the fracture. So let's say, for example, we're 7, 8 years old, and something happens that we feel a little bit ashamed of. And, we have a hard time either admitting that to ourselves, or we have a hard time expressing that to anyone because we may not feel safe to do so. Now, that part that feels shame because it may not be able to show up fully in the world, it stays at that 7, 8-year-old level. And so we grow up as adults, but sometimes when we do something that we feel ashamed of, that younger part can show up, and it can show up in our psyche, in our mind, and it can actually speak out loud. And so we often find that when we're triggered in certain ways, that the way that we're speaking, the things that we're saying, afterwards we might be like, oh my God, I can't believe I said that. Or someone else might say that to us, like, wow, I can't believe you said that to me. And it often is out of character, or at least the character that they are familiar with, or that we are familiar with as our adult self. And the reason for that is because it's actually potentially a younger version of ourselves that is coming out, that is expressing, because perhaps it didn't have the way to express that it needed when it was younger. And so that's where the reparenting idea comes in. It's how do we support those parts that are inside of us to really get their needs met in a way that they didn't get them met when we were younger. Now, often this can bring up a little bit of resistance in us in that, well, wait a minute. My parents, they were so good to me in so many ways, or my grandparents, or my, family, whoever raised me. And it's like, yes, we want to acknowledge the good that came and the gifts and everything that we were given when we were younger. And also we can acknowledge what was missing in terms of what we needed. And often for those of us who are parents, we know, it's not from a place of bad intention. It's often just, there are certain things as parents that we don't know how to give our children sometimes. I have 2 sons myself. And I know that there are times, sometimes just personality differences. Like, one of my children, he's a much more feeling type. And sometimes, I don't fully understand his feelings. And so there's a potential missing experience there of like, how can he get his needs met in the way that he needs? And because we're slightly different personalities, I might not fully meet those needs. And so it's the same in my own childhood. There are certain ways in which I grew up where, my parents might not have known exactly what I needed at the time, and I didn't get it. And so that younger part shows up in my life sometimes to get a bit of attention or to get its needs met. And sometimes it's not at the opportune moment. So that's really the thing here is all the parts are welcome. There's no such thing as a bad part. But sometimes it's not the opportune moment. It's not the appropriate moment for that part to come out. And so that's really what we want to look at here is welcoming all the parts, creating space for them all so that they feel safe, but also making sure that whatever parts are here, that we're taking care of them in the right way. So I'm going to share with you some techniques to be able to learn how to do that, so that when the parts do show up, if it is the right time, that we can welcome them and we can support them. And if it's not the right time, that we can, see if we can get them to step back and come back another time when, would be a right time or a helpful time. And so with that, I can see there's quite a number of people have leaked in as I was talking. So if you missed anything from the beginning, don't worry. I was just giving a basic introduction. And also, I want to invite you all to get some way to write some things down. So if it's a pen and paper, something like that, that's ideal. I know a lot of us, myself included, often write things on our devices. So if you're on a computer or a phone, you can also use that. I'm aware that often on digital devices, messages and things come through, and so they can be a little distracting. So a paper and pen is ideal, but any way of just writing down your thoughts, making some notes is fine. So just take a moment if you need to go and get something. I'll just begin to kind of open up the space and just want to make sure that we've got quite a number of people coming in. So thank you everyone for joining. I'm really glad that everyone's here. I'm just curious if you want to drop in the chat places we're coming from, different parts of the world. I really see a wide variety of people from all over. We've got India, we've got Switzerland, we've got the UK, we've got Hong Kong, another from Switzerland. I see the US. Yeah, where are we coming in from? Some names I know, some names are new to me. So just welcoming everyone. Thank you all for coming. Okay, so now that most of us are here, I just want to take a moment to set the tone for the workshop today. And in doing that, I want to invite you, if you're comfortable, and I can't see you, nobody else can see you. So if you're comfortable to close your eyes for this part, I'd recommend it. Just to really bring your awareness inside. So just go ahead and close your eyes. Maybe take a few deep breaths, just to really calm your nervous system. Really just bringing yourself into presence for a few moments. Just finding your center, however it is that helps you to do that. So if you have a meditation practice, you can draw on your meditation practice, just to bring you into the moment, to allow yourself to sense into your physical body and just be present, welcoming your whole self into this experience. And just noticing if there's any tension or resistance or discomfort anywhere in your body or your mind. And just allowing it to be there without needing to fight or without judging or criticizing yourself. Really just being open, welcoming, caring, loving to whatever experience is coming up in the moment. And just noticing any voices that show up. And without pushing them away, really just opening up and welcoming them in. Creating space for your whole self to show up here today. And as you do that, just notice what it feels like in your body in general. Is there a general sense of ease? Or a general sense of tension? Or does it depend on the part of your body? Are some parts more at ease? Some parts more in tension? Again, without judging, just being aware, just noticing. With a gentle, loving presence. And as we welcome the whole body, also just welcome in the whole mind, including your thoughts, your emotions, the different ways in which ideas show up in your mind, the different patterns that exist, the beliefs. Just really noticing anything at all that shows up in your mind and just allowing it to be there. And if we expand further to just include the whole of anything that's in your awareness at all. Anything that might go deeper or higher. If you have a connection to anything that feels deeply meaningful to you. Could be a connection that some would call spiritual. Could be a connection to higher being. Just allowing your whole self and everything that's included in that to be welcome and present. And as you do that, I just want you to notice what that's like to be welcoming to yourself. You can often be familiar with being welcoming to others, but what's it like to be welcoming to yourself? Like opening up the door and letting all those selves in. And this is where I want you to just notice as you do open that door. What are the selves that seem to be floating around in your awareness? Sense in to notice, are there younger selves? Selves that might show up with a lot of emotion or intensity? Could be self that shows up when you feel frustrated or angry. Really just noticing, oh, when I feel those ways and there's a self that shows up, how old does that self feel? Without needing the exact answer, just noticing if a number comes up. Is it 3 years old? Is it 10 years old? Is it an adult version of yourself? And again, just sensing in some different emotions when you feel shame or you feel guilt. Are there other selves that show up? Perhaps younger selves? And just noticing your feeling towards those selves. And if it's a sense of curiosity, just welcome that. And if you notice yourself judging any of the selves, just notice that that judging is also coming from a part, that there might be a part that judges some of the other selves or criticizes them. So just notice that as another part and what age that might be. You also might have a part that feels sad sometimes, maybe gets a little depressed, or perhaps there might be something that hasn't been grieved fully. I just want you to create space here. And if any emotions come up, that they're welcome. We can just sit with them and be present, be loving and caring. So as you do that, I just want you to notice the constellation, the group of selves that are around. There's your adult self, and some of these perhaps child, younger selves. And just noticing the sense of the group. Are there some selves that tend to take up more space? Or some selves that tend to be more strong or dominant? Some selves that tend to be more passive? They might hide in the corner. Just noticing the whole range of all the cells that make up your whole self. And I just want you to see if you can happen upon a few that really seem to need attention, some form of love, care. It could be one of the ones sitting over in the corner or trying to hide, or it could be one of the ones taking up the most space. Just see if you can happen upon perhaps three specific selves. Just noticing, and kind of bring them into focus, bring them into awareness. We're just going to see if we can hold and take care of them. Just see if you can open up your heart a little bit and welcome them in. Just notice as you sense into them, as you look at them, what ages do they seem to be? How old? Are they younger versions of yourself? Just notice, how are they responding when you pay them some attention? You might want to check in with them one by one. Some of them might shy away from the attention. They might really open up towards the attention and appreciate. Or they might be not sure how to receive that attention. Just really noticing what that's like, how they're responding. Again, without judging them, just accepting them as they are. And also not forcing them to do anything, really giving them their time and space to interact in a way that they feel comfortable. You might just happen upon one in particular that really seems like it needs more attention, more care, more love. It might be one that shows up occasionally in your life when you get triggered. Or perhaps one that really hasn't had much space to show up in your life at all. I just want you to notice the details about this part of yourself. How do they hold themselves? Are they sitting? Are they standing? What emotion do they seem to feel? What kind of thoughts run through their mind? What do they really want? What do they need? What's their intention? What are they trying to do? And just notice if there's any judgment, to let that judgment part step aside and really just hold this part from a place of curiosity and care and compassion. like we're just opening up to get to know them. And so just notice when you come from that place of curiosity, how they respond to that. What's that like for them to be seen in that way? Just notice, is there anything in particular they would like to say? Really just opening your ears, attuning to that part of yourself, being present with it. And I just want you to subtly let it know that you're going to come back to it. We're going to take a little bit of a break, but you're going to come back to it in just a little bit. So just give it a signal. It could be a wink or a nod or a smile or a little wave. Just let it know that we're going to come back to it in just a bit. And so you can slowly bring your awareness, your attention back into your body, back into the present moment, back into the room that you're in at the moment with the screen in front of you. And you can slowly open up your eyes. And I want you to just take your time here as you open your eyes to come back into the present. Just take your time to notice what it was like to explore those different parts of yourself. What it was like for you to welcome the whole of yourself. And if that was a new experience, or if that was familiar in some way, just noticing what it was like to do that. And I want to invite you to take out that pen and paper or whatever writing implements you have, even if it's a digital device, just something to take down some notes. And I'd like, as I'm speaking, so don't wait until I've finished speaking because I'll keep speaking. As I'm sharing, I just want you to start writing down some of the parts that you noticed in that exercise. Just notice, was there an angry part or a frustrated part that showed up? Was there a very young part, a baby part, or an infant part, or a toddler part? Or were there child parts, in the ages of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10? Were there parts that felt shame or guilt, or sadness, grief, or fear, anxiety? Just noticing. See if you can identify what were the parts that showed up. What ages were they? Were there any judgmental parts that showed up, judging the others, criticizing, or having expectations of them? And noticing as you begin to write some of those down, what were the distinct parts that tended to show up? See if you can find a few. Could be one in particular, or two or three. And just see if you can write down, like, what ages were they? What seemed to be their intention, or their job, or the role that they fulfilled. See if you can write that down. Sometimes we have parts that are the good boy or the good girl, one that was scared, fearful, or the one that was sad. Just noticing what is the emotional presence of that part. And I want you to see if you can give that part a positive name. So something like that shows what they were trying to do. Like it could be the protective part that was trying to protect you or protect others. It could be the part that was seeking safety. So maybe a part that felt fearful might be a part that's seeking safety. So it could be the safety part. Or it could be a part that felt shame or guilt, that maybe just wanted to do the right thing. So a part that wanted to do the right thing would be good. So really just noticing a few of those parts and identifying them and giving them some sort of a positive name. We don't want to go here towards the negative direction of a judgmental name. You really want to give them some sort of a positive name that would likely resonate with them, that they would appreciate being called, right? But it acknowledges something that they're doing well or right, or something that they're trying to do well. Just acknowledging them for the intention itself. So just see if you can identify either one in particular here that you're really getting detailed about, or a few that you're just sort of noticing the different flavors, the different ways in which they show up. And again, just being curious and caring and compassionate, noticing if there's any judgment there at all, and just maybe naming that as one of the parts, if there's a judgmental part. But perhaps giving it a good name, like the one who wants us to be better, or the one who can see how good we can become, right? Because what are judgments? Right? So just noticing the ways in which these parts show up. And just identifying the qualities of those parts, the personalities. Noticing how these parts think. So like if this part were to say something, what would it say? What are the types of things that this part would say? Notice the phrases or the sentences. Could be questions, could be statements. Just noticing how would that part express itself? What sort of words would it use? And notice that the words are often related to the age of the part. So how it expresses itself is often an expression of the awareness or the consciousness at that age. So if it's a 2, 3-year-old part, might have very simple ways of expressing itself. Yes, no, mine, mama, dada, and just noticing whatever language you come from, what are the ways in which it would express itself. It's a slightly older part. What kind of questions would it ask, or how would it share about its feelings? And if it's a teenage part, just noticing perhaps a bit more complexity of thought, a deeper understanding of certain things. just writing some of that down. We're just getting a clearer picture. We're looking at the details. We're going into getting to know each of these parts a little bit more. And just creating space for them to be present. So I just want you to spend the next few seconds just looking at whatever you've written down and noticing if there's any gaps, anything else that feels important. Perhaps you've done a lot of detail on one of the parts and you want to write a little bit more about one of the other ones. Just sort of noticing what you've written down and filling in anything else that feels important to acknowledge or to notice. And as you do that, I want you to kind of take that step back in your awareness and just notice, what have you focused on? So kind of like taking a meta view, a higher view, a view on your view. What have you focused on? Which parts have really shown up? Which parts of yourself have shown themselves to you? I want you to take a moment to just show gratitude for those parts, for showing up here today. However it is that you like to express gratitude. Could be in words, could be a gesture, like pray hands or a hand on your heart, or a wink, smile, embrace. Just notice what it's like to show some gratitude to the parts that showed up today, for showing up, for being willing to be here, let themselves be known, be seen, be heard, be sensed. And now just let them bask in that gratitude for a little while. And I want us to step away. We're going to come back in just a moment, but I just want us to step away and to open up to the wisest, most loving, caring version of yourself. Now, if you're a parent or a grandparent, this might be the aspect of yourself that shows up when you're really caring for someone, maybe a child that you care deeply about. I really want you to tap into that side of yourself that has the capacity to love deeply. If you don't have your own children, it could be a nephew or a niece that you get to spend time with, or it could be some child in your life that you really know how to take care of, or that you have a close bond to, a connection in some way, or have had at some point in your life. So really just open up that loving, caring, compassionate side of yourself, the most wise version of yourself that shows up in those moments. So really just sense into some moments in your life where you've had the capacity to be loving, caring, gentle, supportive. Just notice how you can be that at specific times. This is an adult version of yourself that we're welcoming in. And it may even be a self that only shows up occasionally, or a self that may not have shown up very much in your life yet, but we're welcoming it in. It could be a self that is just opening up to the possibility of showing up more in your life. I want you to notice the quality of that wise, loving self, the parental, adult, caring nature that knows how to take care of others or support them in some way. And if there's any difficulty with accessing that part of yourself, I want you to just notice how you can even model others that you've seen that act in that way. It could be a parent that you really admire or a grandparent. Just noticing what is it that you admire about the quality of that ability to really take care of others. And noticing that in order for you to be able to see that in them, that you have that too. We cannot see what we do not have. So just noticing in yourself where that exists, where that version of yourself is. We just want to welcome that part into front and center stage to really show up now, to step up. And what we're going to do now is I want to invite that part to go back with us as we go back and check in on the other parts, perhaps the younger parts. So if you're comfortable, you can go ahead and close your eyes again. And really just bring that wisest version of yourself to meet these other selves, these younger selves, these inner children. And notice as that wiser version of yourself comes in contact with these other parts, how it begins to interact with them. Does it start telling stories? Does it welcome them into a loving embrace? Does it give them space? Because it can sense that they might need some space. And noticing how that wise version of yourself also has the capacity to treat each one of those parts individually in the way that they need, meaning that it might talk to one, but might hug another, might smile at another, where I want you to just take a moment and really allow yourself, that wise version of yourself, to take the lead here. To take the lead and guide these younger parts of yourself into a place of safety, relaxation, care, love, embrace. And just notice as you do that, as you bring this wise, loving, caring version of yourself, which of those parts lean in and they accept that love. Notice which of them are perhaps more neutral. And notice if any of them are skeptical or resistant or still fearful. And without judging, really just allowing that wise version of yourself to treat them in exactly the way that they need to be treated, meeting their needs so perfectly, so wonderfully, that each of those parts can start to open up a little bit more. Perhaps trust a little bit more without forcing them or pushing them to do anything at all. Really going slowly, gently, carefully. But just letting them know that wise part has the capacity to be solid, dependable, reliable. And that could be helping them understand that through words, things you can say. And it also might be really just being a loving presence. Just letting them know that you're there. And that whenever they're ready, no matter how long it takes, that you're there to love, care, and support them. We really want to give each one of them that needs or is open to attention some specific attention, specific type of attention that they're needing. You could check in with them and ask them how they're feeling, or if there's anything that they need. Just notice how they respond. Are they willing to open up and share? If so, what might they say? Or if they're still not quite sure, what can you say to help put them at ease, to help them feel safe, genuinely loved? And just allowing yourself to go back and forth, letting them speak or share, letting the wise version of yourself respond in a loving way. And this could be in words, or it could be in some form of loving gesture, holding hands, or a warm hug, or a simple smile. And notice what experiences these parts might be looking for. And really allow that wise version of yourself to begin to guide them through that experience. Is it an environment of safety? Is it giving them support to be able to express themselves to someone else? Being right there beside them as they express? supporting them, protecting them, taking care of them every step of the way. Or is it bringing them away to a place where they feel safe and loved, cared for? Just whatever it is, really giving them exactly what they need. And noticing as you do that, how there can be a sort of melting or deeper connection into the wider whole self. That this wise, loving self is a form of connective tissue, like a beating heart in the middle, that really just welcomes and allows all these selves to come a little bit closer, to feel a little bit safer, to feel empowered, to show up in their wholeness. And I want you to really start seeing each of these parts as whole in of themselves, just as they are. That there's a perfection to them, a beauty, a wonderfulness. And I want you to really see that in them. Where is the light? Notice their inner light that shines outwards. Notice what it is about each of the parts that is beautiful. And I want the wise part to acknowledge each of those parts for what they can see in them that is wonderful, that is whole, just as they are. Really just let each of those parts know that they're seen and loved for just who they are, accepted and cared for just who they are. And just notice what that's like in your whole self, to have an ecosystem, constellation of parts that are loved just as they are. And for your whole self to love yourself just as you are. Noticing what that's like to be in acceptance. To be loving towards yourself. To take care of yourself. I just want you to leave an open invitation to these parts to come out and get the support they need when they need it, to let you know, to let your whole self know, and particularly that wise part of yourself, to know whenever they need support. I want you to slowly, as you do that, slowly start to bring your awareness back to the present, but to bring with you some form of a commitment or a reminder to yourself. It could be something like to give yourself more time and space, to take care of yourself more, to be more loving, more gentle, more compassionate with yourself more often. Could be to just remind yourself occasionally to take a step back, to open up your awareness and to take care of yourself in some specific way. So just notice as you start to come back to the present and you slowly start to open up your eyes, to bring with you something simple, some form of a simple commitment to yourself that one or a few of those parts would really appreciate or would really benefit from in some way. And just make that internal commitment to yourself to do that for them. It could be something regularly, like on a daily basis, or it could be something more random that shows up in specific contexts or specific situations, like perhaps when triggers usually show up, to really give yourself something to support yourself in some way. Be to say some kind words to yourself in your mind, some loving encouragement or support, whatever it is. Just give yourself that. Commit something to yourself in that way. And if there's anything today that you'd like to spend a little bit more time with, there's a recording that has been taken of this. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to me now in the chat, anything that you'd like to ask, or you can reach out to me at any other time, but there will be a recording that will be sent out, so you'll have it. And I really hope that this was a helpful and enjoyable experience for all of you. And I'm really grateful for all of you that showed up today. It was a beautiful, beautiful crowd of people that showed up. So thank you for joining us, and looking forward to hearing from those of you who got to experience today and to hear what it was like for you. And so everyone feel free to reach out at any point. And I look forward to connecting with you and to hearing how it went. So I heard some people, telling me that it was soothing and being grateful. So thank you for sharing those notes, and appreciate you for sharing and for being here today, joining us for this experience, and particularly for taking care of any of those parts that showed up today. So just an open invitation going forwards for any of you to really take care of yourselves in those ways. So I'm hearing a question here. Do the different parts show up in different areas of the body somatically? Oh, great question. Great question. The simple answer is yes. There's a more complex answer which I'll share as well. So we often do get somatic responses in our body depending on what type of part it is. So, for example, those of us that might have something like an anxiety, like a fear of something coming up in the future, that often shows up in the gut, or it can show up in the form of headaches. So kind of like those, kind of like the tension in the mind or the tension in the stomach, sometimes in the shoulders. So that's kind of like often an anxiety that can show up, and the tensions that show up in the body are often indicators that there's some attention that is needed. And so that's often the information that is coming through the body, is that there's some form of attention that is needed. And if we can pay attention in the way that that part needs, then often the somatic response will go away. So whether it's a headache or like a discomfort in your belly, or tension in your shoulders, as some examples. There are other, types of emotions that have different somatic responses, or different parts. Like if it's an angry part, often angry parts will show up in kind of tension. It could be like in the chest, like if the heart, like kind of connected to the heart, like a racing heart, and then like a tightness in the chest, um, or kind of a deeper. I'm kind of pointing here, like a little bit lower, kind of down in the Chinese system. I would call it the Dantian, which is kind of like a little bit further down. There's like a central point in your body system. That's often where anger comes from. So kind of like there's this powerful response. Um, and again, if we can tap into those feelings and how they're showing up somatically for us, then we start to get more information about what the part is needing. And there are very specific processes that we can go through to use the somatic response to begin to communicate with the part more, because that's often what the part is doing, is because perhaps we're not giving it space or we're not contacting it directly, it will use our physical body to get attention, or to let us know that something is up. And if we are more caring in that way, then we'll spend a bit of time, just checking in with our body and seeing what it needs and how it can be supported. And often if we do that, then the physical somatic response will often dissipate or lessen. But at sometimes it can actually increase for a little bit as we're giving the support, and then over time it can lessen as well. So yes, great question. And I could go through different parts, and specific. It's often related to the emotion of that part. Like depending on the emotion that comes up in that part, that emotion often shows up in certain parts of the body. And so part of what we want to do is learn to express that emotion more fully and create space for it. And that somatic response then tends to stabilize. But one thing that can also happen is that the physical somatic response shows up again and again in our life, and it can be like a helpful reminder. So often when we feel tension, or we feel something, discomfort in some way, because that's often how somatic responses show up, um, we can often push them away or be resistant to them. And so more and more, if we can learn to accept them and even appreciate the feeling when it comes up, even if it's uncomfortable, then that really can allow us to have a better sense of what we need, because it's often it's a blind spot, right? And that's why the somatic response shows up usually. Is there some sort of a blind spot that we have, that we're not really taking care of ourselves in the way that we need, or something like that? And so if we can start to see that physical feeling as a form of information that is helpful to us, we can begin to become more grateful to it. And the more grateful we are to it, then often, ironically, paradoxically, it tends to come up less. But then also, it's a good reminder to remind us to take care of ourselves in some way. I hope that helped with that question. I see another question coming in here. Oh, actually, I'm going to continue because I have a secondary question here, and then I'll come back to the other one about spiritual aspect. So just following up on the somatic aspects, it says here, given the somatic aspects, am I correct in assuming that this could be very helpful in chronic conditions and addictive behaviors? Yes, exactly. You're spot on there. So chronic conditions are, now I want to be careful here. I don't want to make any blanket statements, but often chronic conditions are when we haven't paid attention to a somatic response for a long time, often over years or sometimes even decades. If we haven't paid attention to that chronic response, sorry, the somatic response, it turns into a chronic condition because it's showing up again and again, and it's not being responded to, or it's not being taken care of in the way that it needs to. And so then it will exacerbate and it will become more intense, and then it will often become a chronic condition that then, can require more support. It can even require then medical intervention to get support with. But if we can catch it in the earlier stages where it's just a somatic response and we can resolve it in some way, then often it doesn't become a chronic condition. Now, once it's become a chronic condition, sometimes just by doing this kind of work, we can relieve the chronic condition. But sometimes also, there is medical intervention that is needed depending on the specific chronic condition, or we can have both, right? And this is where having the medical intervention, but also having kind of the deeper inner healing work can support the healing process at the physical level. And then addictive behaviors are a little bit more complex because there's a lot of different types of addictive behaviors. But usually an addiction is coming from something where we're trying to fill up ourselves in some way. And there's a part, it comes back to parts work again. There's a part there that the strategy that they learned to fill that need is perhaps an unhealthy one. And so what we want to do is build a relationship with that part and help give it what it needs in a healthy way so that the part gets its needs met, but it doesn't do it in a way that is, addictive, particularly to whether it's a substance or a specific experience that is not helpful or damaging in some way. So we want to be careful about that. And the way that we do that is checking in with the part, because the addictive behavior, it's trying to fulfill some need. And so what we want to do is get the need met in a way that is healthy. And one of the best ways that we can do that is precisely by getting to know the part and what it needs. And it could be making a deal with it, or it could be, being sometimes the firm but loving parent, where we go, well, this is the boundary we're going to set. This is the healthy way of getting that need met. Let's do this for a while until it becomes the new pattern. So yeah, great questions. Oh, great. I'm happy that answered your question. Thank you for letting me know. Coming back to the other question, what about the spiritual aspect of guidance? Thank you for that question. Any suggestions I can provide? So the spiritual aspect of guidance, I want to be careful here because I know that there are a lot of different people that have different relationships to spirituality, and I want to make sure that I'm being inclusive in that way. And so I'm going to speak to this from a slightly more abstract place. I've studied, I can see some of my books over here. I've studied a lot of different forms of philosophy and spirituality, and I have a deep respect for a lot of the different lineages out there. And so I want to make sure that I'm speaking in that way that includes all the different forms of spirituality, while at the same time, hopefully sharing something that will be helpful. So one of the things that I did share in the first meditation was, your connection to something that is more deeply meaningful, or perhaps, a higher being or something like that. And, this is an area where we can get deep support from being able to connect to something that is wider than our individual awareness, right? So kind of looking at it from that wider level where we are on this, spiritual evolutionary path through our life, that if we can tap into, a healing power of something that is what we would call like transpersonal, like that goes beyond the personal or the individual into something that is wider, that can hold us, um, that can often be one of the most healing and helpful um, ways for us to move through these kinds of experiences. And um, no matter what your belief is or the lineage that you come from, um, there are ways in which, and there's actually a lot of, documented research and evidence, so even kind of if we're looking at this from a scientific perspective, we've had a lot of really great research come out in the last few decades of how powerful um, those types of beliefs and connections to something that goes beyond the individual can really be. And so the way that we can begin to open up into, getting that form of support is, one, you'll have whatever spiritual tradition or lineage you might come from or have connection to. There are specific practices, that are, come from each lineage. And at the same time, and we see this in, a lot of whether it's the lineage founder or someone who comes kind of goes that level deeper into that spiritual practice, that there's ways that we can build our own individual practice where it's taking the wisdom that has come from the tradition or the lineage and beginning to open up into a real personal connection with with whatever it is that we can connect to. And as we do that and we develop that personal connection, like as I was talking about with that wise self that we, focused on more in the second meditation, that wise self, we can get access to wisdom that goes beyond our individual self. So now it's not only that I have this wisdom within me, right? But it's actually, there is this wisdom that comes from outside that fills me up and that I can access and that can support me. And so in doing this kind of, healing work where we can support these parts of ourselves, if we can open up in that way to a wider, more expansive, deeper form of wisdom, then often there are things and healing experiences that we can give to ourselves that, don't necessarily come from what we would call the individual personal self. They come from something that is wider or higher. And there's more and more research that shows that being able to connect in these ways really supports us in every way. So it's that kind of coming back to the idea of wholeness, right? As this whole self. The whole self includes not just our individual, right? The whole self goes beyond. And so this is where, spiritual guidance and any form of contemplation, prayer, meditation can be really helpful to help us to be able to get into deeper connection and contact with forms of self that can be healing. So I hope that was answering your question and helpful. Thank you for letting me know. I'm glad that I brought some clarity and that you're appreciating. Thank you. Thank you for the question. And thank you all for being here. This has been wonderful. I know it's quite late for some of you and some of you have had to head off. So thank you for staying with me. It's my early morning here. I see the sun coming up on the snow peaks here in front of me. And I'm gonna run off and take my children to school now. So wherever you are in the world, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. Thank you for being here with me. I really appreciate it. Looking forward to connecting with you more deeply at another time. Goodbye.